Cannabis Common Sense, the show that tells the truth about marijuana and the politics behind its prohibition.
Welcome to another exciting edition of Cannabis Common Sense. We have a great show for you tonight. I did a couple of interviews down in Mexico this last weekend, and we're going to run those. We also have incredible news from this past Tuesday's elections, where we swept to victory across several different states and won double initiatives in Mississippi, Montana, and South Dakota. So stay tuned for the Hemp News segment. We go over all those victories and a few more medical stories. We have interviews with Enrique Ibarra of the May and Hayes Experience, and Maureen Priestley, who is also in Puerto Vallarta and helped organize some of the May and Hayes panels. And she works with medical professionals and is a medical professional herself, and helps medical marijuana patients there in Mexico and across Latin America. So stay tuned for those interviews and our lengthy Hemp News segment, which will come up right after our infamous Dancing Cannabis Leaves.
I feel the force.
Tonight with Hemp News starts off with the election results, of course. Marijuana and drug policy reform swept across the board in Tuesday's elections, giving advocates such as us a major boost as we pushed in federal prohibition. 5 more states legalized cannabis in some form, and here in Oregon, we became the first state to legalize psilocybin mushroom for therapy and also more broadly decriminalize drug possession. Meanwhile, voters in Washington, D.C. also approved a measure to decriminalize psychedelics in the nation's capital. While the presidential and many congressional races are still being tallied, these reforms passed decisively, further demonstrating that Americans of all political ideologies are ready to abandon the country's prohibitionist approach to drugs. With the addition of Arizona, Montana, New Jersey, and South Dakota as adult use marijuana states, 1/3 of the country's population now lives in a state where cannabis is legal after all these laws take effect. And Mississippi passed medical marijuana. The results once again affirm that marijuana legalization is a uniquely popular issue with voters of all political persuasions, with majorities of Democrats, Independents, and Republicans consistently endorsing legalization in national polls. The results also continue a multi-decade-long trend of marijuana legalization and advocates achieving success at the ballot box. Prior to this election, starting in 1996, voters have decided affirmatively on 28 separate ballot measures legalizing cannabis, 18 measures legalizing medical marijuana, and 10 measures legalizing adult use. And with these 5 new states in, that adds 8 more initiatives to that tally. Here in Oregon, with the landmark passage of Measure 109 and 110, Oregon voters have opted to decriminalize drugs and legalize medicinal psilocybin. Oregon made history on Election Day this week with 2 major drug policy reforms after voters approved Measure 109, which legalizes psilocybin therapy, and Measure 110, which decriminalized drug possession and reallocates some cannabis funding to pay for addiction treatment services. The success of Measure 110, which passed with nearly 60% of the vote, makes Oregon the first state to decriminalize the possession of most drugs, including heroin. The measure also reallocates some cannabis tax revenue to help fund new state-run addiction treatment services. With the passage of Measure 109, meanwhile, Oregon is also the first state to legalize psilocybin, the substance that gives hallucinogenic mushrooms their intoxicating effects, for medicinal use. The measure passed with 56% support. Under the initiative, the Oregon Health Authority is now tasked with creating a psilocybin-assisted therapy program where licensed facilities will administer the drug in a controlled therapeutic setting. Recent research shows that psilocybin has significant medical potential against severe depression, which has prompted the FDA to label the psychedelic a potential, quote, breakthrough therapy, end quote. This is likely a sign that the agency intends to accelerate the drug's development and review process. Reminds me that back in the 50s and 60s, Cary Grant took LSD for psychological reasons. In the Midwest, South Dakotans have delivered a crippling blow to those who favored the status quo of marijuana prohibition in the Mount Rushmore state by simultaneously passing a pair of ballot initiatives, Initiative Measure 26 and the Constitutional Amendment A. Constitutional Amendment A allows adults to purchase and possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana and grow up to 3 plants for personal use. Measure 26 permits qualified patients to possess and home cultivate cannabis for medical purposes and establishes a state-regulated retail system for medical marijuana sales. No other state has ever moved from total marijuana prohibition to allowing both medical use and adult use access, quite literally overnight, in the same vote. These votes are a stunning rebuke to those elected officials that, for decades, have refused to move forward with substantive marijuana law reform legislation. And they are yet another indication of the near universal popularity of these policy changes among voters in all regions of the United States. Under South Dakota law, the possession of any amount of marijuana has been a Class 1 misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year in jail, a $2,000 fine, and a criminal record. In 2018, an estimated 1 out of every 10 arrests made in the state was marijuana related. In recent weeks, South Dakota's Republican Governor Kristi Noem spoke out publicly on television against both measures. The very reason South Dakotans went to the polls to decide these issues is because elected officials like Governor Noem consistently failed to act. The majority of South Dakotans, like the majority of Americans, believe that physicians should be able to decide if medical cannabis is a proper course of medical treatment. And they do not believe that people ought to be criminalized and stigmatized for possessing small amounts of marijuana. In the Southwest, Arizona voters have approved Proposition 207, a statewide ballot initiative legalizing the possession, use, and commercial sale of marijuana for adults. The act permits those aged 21 or older to possess up to 1 ounce of cannabis and directs revenue from retail cannabis sales to fund various public education and safety programs. Adults may cultivate up to 6 plants for non-commercial purposes in a private residence. Those with marijuana convictions are permitted to petition the courts to have their records expunged. Until now, Arizona had imposed some of the strictest prohibition laws in the country. In some instances, the possession of even small amounts of marijuana was classified as a felony. By rejecting this failed policy, no Arizonans going forward will be saddled with criminal conviction for engaging in the personal possession or cultivation of cannabis, or face the lifelong stigma that comes with it. Proposition 207 will disrupt the illicit market in low-level marijuana arrests, create jobs and new revenue. This result once again shows that marijuana legalization is an issue that is supported by a majority of all Americans, regardless of party politics. In New Jersey, back east, New Jersey voters have overwhelmingly decided in favor of Question 1, which calls for amending the state's constitution in a manner that accommodates for the adult use, possession, production, and sale of marijuana to those 21 years of age or older. Garden State's voters spoke resoundingly. They're demanding their lawmakers end the failed policy of marijuana criminalization and instead pursue a more sensible path of regulation and legalization. Law enforcement in New Jersey arrests more citizens each year for minor marijuana violations than almost any other state in the nation. By moving to end this fiscally wasteful and morally repugnant policy, state officials will now be able to prioritize law enforcement resources toward combating more serious criminal activities, better respect the personal freedom and civil liberties of their citizens, end the racist application of marijuana prohibition laws against communities of color, and direct new tax revenue toward important social programs such as education and infrastructure development. Because New Jersey's Question 1 is a non-binding legislatively referred ballot question, the New Jersey legislature must now take immediate action to draft and implement enabling legislation in a manner that is in accordance with New Jersey's sentiments. Their first priority should be bringing about an end to the tens of thousands of low-level marijuana possession arrests that occur each year in New Jersey. Once that's accomplished, they should then expeditiously move forward to meet the voters' second demand, which is to initiate regulations to license and oversee a commercial cannabis market in New Jersey. Fresh off a resounding victory in his own state for marijuana legalization, New Jersey's Governor Phil Murphy is taking time to congratulate other states that also voted to end cannabis prohibition, sending congratulatory tweets to Arizona, South Dakota, Montana, and Mississippi. New Jersey's Governor Phil Murphy had tried to push this through the legislature, but said, quote, "I wish we could have gotten it done through the legislative process. We just couldn't find the last few votes, so it's on the referendum," I'm strongly supporting it first and foremost for social justice reasons, end quote. Murphy also called on voters to support the proposal in an email blast that circulated to New Jersey Democrats. He said in July that legalizing cannabis is, quote, an incredibly smart thing to do from both an economic and social justice perspective. In the Mountain States, voters in Montana have passed 2 initiatives to legalize marijuana. Initiative 190, which allows for the use, production, and sale of marijuana by adults. Voters additionally passed Constitutional Initiative 118, which limits marijuana use to those 21 years of age or older. The result illustrates that support for adult use marijuana legalization extends across geographic and demographic lines. Marijuana legalization is not exclusively a blue state issue, but an issue that is supported by all Americans. By approving these voter initiative measures, Montana now joins the growing list of states that have recognized that it's time to end marijuana criminalization and move forward with a new approach. I-190 allows adults to possess up to 1 ounce of marijuana in Montana and to cultivate up to 4 mature plants for personal use. It also establishes a licensing system for commercial marijuana producers and retail sellers. Constitutional Initiative 118 establishes a legal age requirement of 21 years old for those wishing to legally possess, grow, or purchase cannabis. We congratulate the voters of Montana and the citizens there for passing both these initiatives. Meanwhile, down south, down in Dixie, a majority of voters in Mississippi voted to approve Initiative 65, which provides for a state-regulated marijuana access system for qualified patients. Conversely, voters rejected a far more restrictive effort placed on the ballot by the legislature, which was Measure 65A. So activists, such as us, put an initiative for medical marijuana on the ballot in Mississippi, which was Measure 65, and the Mississippi legislature, trying to quash it, put a much more restrictive measure to regulate some medical marijuana and called it Measure 65A. Measure 65A was defeated overwhelmingly, while Measure 65 passed. Initiative 65 puts the needs and interests of patients first. This was a grassroots effort to provide patients with access to a treatment option that patients already enjoy in 34 other states and the District of Columbia. By contrast, Measure 65A was a cynical effort by lawmakers to misdirect voters. The same state lawmakers that for decades had refused to ever seriously address the issue were the ones behind 65A, and voters wisely rejected their campaign. Initiative 65 establishes a system of state licensed dispensaries to engage in the retail dispensing of cannabis and cannabis products to patients with the doctor's authorization. The measure places no limit on the number of dispensaries that may be licensed in the state and mandates that local municipalities, quote, shall not impair the availability of and reasonable access to medical marijuana, end quote. The proposal further mandates that state officials begin providing licenses for retailers for medical marijuana in Mississippi no later than August 15th next year, 2021. The surge of state-level marijuana legalization victories on Election Day is already having a ripple effect, with policymakers and advocates in nearby states arguing that the reform wins demonstrate the need to enact similar policy changes in their jurisdictions. From New York to New Mexico, calls to pursue legalization have been renewed post this election this week. The governor of Connecticut, for example, said Tuesday to legalizing marijuana in his neighboring New Jersey, in addition to ongoing cannabis reform efforts throughout the Northeast, underscores the need for his state to enact the policy change in a regionally coordinated manner. Governor Ned Lamont, Democrat there in Connecticut, was asked on Wednesday about the prospects of legalizing marijuana for adults in Connecticut, especially since the state legislature gained additional Democratic seats following the election. He said that other issues are, quote, on the table and that legalization could bring in needed tax revenue. He also discussed the regional implications of cannabis reform efforts in surrounding states. Taking a lesson from regional public safety policies amid the coronavirus pandemic, Lamont said, quote, my thinking is sort of similar when it comes to marijuana, end quote. If we do something, we do it on a regional basis, end quote. He said, quote, New Jersey's done this, Massachusetts is already legal, Rhode Island's looking at it, New York is looking at it, so I'll be talking with my fellow governors about what, if anything, we in Connecticut want to do on a regional basis, and then talking with the legislature as well, end quote. Prior to the pandemic, Lamont and the governors of New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania met to discuss how to best implement cannabis legalization to promote public safety. Last year, they agreed to a set of principles for regulating marijuana markets. Lamont isn't the only public official who's taken notice of Tuesday's marijuana reform votes and what that means for their respective jurisdictions. New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio congratulated New Jersey for approving the legalization referendum during a briefing on Wednesday and said, quote, "It's time to do the right thing by enacting the policy change in New York in a way that's safe and that empowers communities that have often suffered from the wrong kind of laws in the past," end quote. New York's Governor Andrew Cuomo said last month that legalizing cannabis represents a key way the state can recover economically from the coronavirus pandemic, and he stressed that they would be passing the reform, quote, "soon," end quote. A top aide to Governor Cuomo in New York also said they again plan to include legalization in their 2021 budget proposal. An Arizona initiative to legalize marijuana also passed Tuesday and is emboldening advocates in neighboring New Mexico to step up the push for reform there. And from Washington, D.C., voters approved a local initiative to decriminalize possession of a wide range of psychedelics, including psilocybin, ayahuasca, and ibogaine. The district joins 3 other cities in enacting the policy change, part of a national movement to reform laws governing entheogenic plants and fungi. Under the new law, possession in Washington, D.C., and the use of psychedelics will be among the district's lowest law enforcement priorities. This historic set of victories will place even greater pressure on Congress to address the glaring and untenable conflicts between state and federal laws when it comes to cannabis legalization. The federal government is out of step with the clear national trend toward legalization. We can put an end to the social injustices and other harms that result from the criminalization of marijuana. While cannabis legalization is not the cure-all to end the war on drugs, it's a necessary step and would provide an opportunity for many long-oppressed communities to finally have a chance to heal. The country may be split on the overall direction they want the country to go, evidenced by the close presidential race and congressional contests that have yet to be called. But when it comes to drug policy reform, voters spoke clearly on Tuesday. Criminalization should be replaced with regulation. Meanwhile, also in South Dakota, members of the Oglala Sioux Tribal Council voted 11-8 this week in favor of the enactment of a new 80-page ordinance regulating the possession and use of marijuana on the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. Members of the tribe in March initially passed a referendum in support of changing tribal marijuana laws. The ordinance permits the use of cannabis for both patients and adults, non-patients aged 21 years and older. It permits tribal members to cultivate and dispense cannabis and also allows for the establishment of social consumption facilities, which may be assessed by both tribal members and non-members. The new Pine Ridge Reservation ordinance will take effect in 30 days. The Oglala Sioux tribe is the first Native American tribe to move forward to legalize marijuana use in a state that is yet to similarly regulate it. Now, since then, this week, the South Dakota people have voted to legalize both medical and recreational marijuana. But the Oglala Sioux Nation did it first. Under South Dakota law, the possession of any amount of marijuana is a Class 1 misdemeanor, punishable by up to 1 year in jail, a $2,000 fine, and a criminal record. In 2018, an estimated 1 out of every 10 arrests made in South Dakota were marijuana related, according to data compiled in South Dakota for Better Marijuana Laws. 95% of all cannabis arrests in South Dakota last year were just for possession. Now we'll go on to some medical stories. Our first story tonight is out of Michigan. An estimated 1 in 5 cancer patients residing in a state where medical cannabis is legally accessible report using it therapeutically, according to data published in the American Journal of Clinical Oncology. A team of investigators affiliated with Beaumont Hospital, Office of Hematology and Oncology in Michigan, surveyed 188 cancer patients about their use of medical cannabis. Surveys were completed in 2018, prior to Michigan's enactment of adult-use marijuana legalization. Michigan legalized medical marijuana access to qualifying patients back in 2008. 25% of the survey respondents, a percentage that researchers acknowledge is consistent with prior studies, reported having used cannabis. Investigators report that, quote, the vast majority of patients believe medical cannabis use to have resulted in improvements of the symptoms that were assessed, especially pain, poor appetite, and anxiety, end quote. The authors concluded, quote, this survey adds to the growing body of evidence that medical cannabis is a safe and potentially effective adjunct to conventional medications for the palliation of cancer patients. Given the increasing prevalence of medical cannabis use among cancer patients, it's imperative that hematologists and oncologists become comfortable with discussing this topic with patients, end quote. The study, Medical Cannabis in Cancer Patients, a survey of community hematology oncology population, appears in this month's edition of the American Journal of Clinical Oncology. The rap star Jay-Z's new cannabis brand, Monogram, has launched a billboard advertising campaign at the border between states disparate cannabis laws. Sean J.C. Carter's cannabis brand, Monogram, is setting up billboards on the borders of states with disparate cannabis laws, Ad Age magazine reports. The message, quote, "Here, cannabis is legal. Enjoy responsibly, will be on the ads when heading into a legal state. When heading into states where cannabis remains prohibited, the billboards will read, 'Here, cannabis is illegal. Avoid the bookings,' end quote, referring to arrests. For 2 weeks, the billboards, a combination of LED and truck, will be on the borderlines of Colorado and Wyoming, Colorado and Kansas, Illinois and Wisconsin, Michigan and Wisconsin, Nevada and Idaho, Oregon and Idaho, and Washington and Idaho. A Monogram spokesperson told Ad Age that the borders were chosen because the 2 neighboring states have, quote, most starkly opposing regulations. So the least progressive states bordering the most progressive state, in order to best illustrate that a single state line can make a world of difference, end quote. The campaign is tied to the 50th anniversary of the Controlled Substances Act, which outlawed cannabis federally, placing it in a Schedule I category, claiming it has a high potential for abuse and no currently accepted medical use. John Ehrlichman, a policy advisor to President Richard Nixon back in the 60s and 70s, admitted that cannabis was criminalized back then in the Controlled Substances Act of 1972 to, quote, disrupt the anti-war movement and black and hippie communities, end quote. Monogram issued a statement via Ad Age saying, quote, the lasting effects of this law have reverberated through the past half century, leading to injustices including mass incarceration for cannabis-related offenses. Progress has been made recently with states' individual legalization efforts, but cannabis continues to be stigmatized by political agendas and the arbitrary borders that still demarcate those who can benefit from it, whether that's through entrepreneurship or the positive effects of its use, end quote. JC, who joined cannabis company Caliva last year as the chief brand strategist, said that, quote, cannabis culture has been marred by the effects of the Controlled Substances Act and stigmatized by political agendas. While there's been progress, as we launched Monogram, we felt it was imperative that we call out the arbitrary borders that still demarcate who can benefit from cannabis, whether that's through business or the positive effects of its use, end quote, he said in a statement. Jay-Z announced the launch of Monogram just last week, unveiling the brand's website and Instagram page. Next story tonight, those with a history of cannabis use over the past year are no more likely than non-users to experience an injury at work, according to data published in the journal Occupational Medicine. A team of investigators affiliated with the University of Toronto Department of Occupational Medicine assessed the relationship between past year cannabis use and work-related injuries in a population-based sample of over 136,500 Canadian workers. The researchers identified, quote, no association between past year cannabis use and work-related injury, end quote, for employees in any occupation, including those who worked in high injury risk occupations. By contrast, being male and being under 39 years of age was positively associated with having a higher risk of workplace injury. The authors concluded, quote, to the best of our knowledge, this was the largest population-based cross-sectional study examining the association between past year cannabis use and work-related injuries. We found that workers reporting using cannabis more than once in the past year were no more likely to report having experienced a work-related injury over the same time period in a large cohort of the Canadian working population, end quote. Their conclusions are similar to those of other studies finding that adults who consume cannabis in their off hours are no more likely to suffer injuries at work than those employees who abstain from cannabis. Suspicionless marijuana testing in the workplace is not now, nor has it ever been, an evidence-based policy. Rather, these discriminatory practices are a holdover from the zeitgeist that the 1980s war on drugs brought. But times have changed, attitudes have changed, and in many places, the marijuana laws have changed. It's time for workplace policies to adapt to this new reality and to cease punishing employees for activities they engage in during their off hours that pose no workplace safety threat. In recent months, lawmakers in several municipalities, including New York City, Richmond, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., have enacted legislation limiting the use of marijuana-specific pre-employment drug screening. Both Maine and Nevada have enacted state-specific legislation barring certain employers from refusing to hire a worker solely because he or she tested positive for cannabis on a pre-employment drug screen. The abstract of this study, Cannabis Use and Work-Related Injuries, a cross-sectional analysis, is available online. Our next story tonight is on the daily administration of plant-derived THC-rich cannabis oil is effective and well tolerated among patients with fibromyalgia, according to trial data published in the journal Pain Medicine. Fibromyalgia is a chronic pain syndrome characterized by widespread musculoskeletal pain and fatigue. The demonstration of safety and efficacy in this gold standard model is significant. Millions of Americans suffer with fibromyalgia, a condition that tends to be poorly controlled by standard medicine. These clinical findings indicate that for many of these patients, plant-derived cannabis preparations may be the safe and effective alternative. A team of Brazilian researchers assessed the efficacy of THC-rich cannabis oil versus placebo in patients with fibromyalgia over an 8-week period. The mean dose used in the cannabis group was 3.6 drops, about 4.4 milligrams of THC, and 0.8 milligrams of CBD. Cannabis dosing was associated with an extended significant reduction in the subject's symptoms, as assessed by the Fibromyalgia Impact Questionnaire. Patients receiving the placebo did not experience similar reductions. The authors reported, quote, "The impact of intervention on quality of life in the cannabis group participants was evident, resulting in reports of well-being and more energy for activities of daily living. Pain attacks were also reduced," end quote. The authors concluded, quote, "To our knowledge, this is the first randomized controlled trial to demonstrate the benefit of cannabis oil, a THC-rich whole plant extract, on symptoms and on the quality of life of people with fibromyalgia. We conclude that phytocannabinoids can be a low-cost and well-tolerated therapy for symptom relief and quality of life improvements in these patients, and we suggest that this therapy could be included as an herbal medicine option for the treatment of this condition in Brazilian public health system," end quote. Observational case-controlled trial data had previously reported that fibromyalgia patients who inhale cannabis experience greater relief from their symptoms as compared to those who do not. The administration of oral THC, as well as the synthetic cannabinoid Nabalon, have also shown benefits in subjects with fibromyalgia. The abstract of this study, Ingestion of THC-rich cannabis oil in people with fibromyalgia, a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled clinical trial, is available online. Our last story tonight is from Chicago, Illinois. Women enrolled in a state-licensed medical cannabis access program are more likely than men to report either reducing or discontinuing their use of prescription medications, according to data published in the Journal of Women's Health. Investigators with DePaul University in Chicago and Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore surveyed 361 patients registered with Illinois state-sponsored medical cannabis access program. The researchers reported that women acknowledged using cannabis to address a greater variety of medical conditions than did men, and that they were more likely to report having either reduced or ceased their use of prescription medicines following enrollment in the program. Female respondents were also less likely than male respondents to report having their decision to use medical cannabis supported by either their primary care provider or by a physician specialist. The authors of the study concluded, quote, "The results from our cross-sectional study describe a number of gender-associated patterns within the use and outcomes of medical cannabis among patients with chronic conditions. Women appear to be more likely than men to use medical cannabis for a range of symptoms, specifically pain, anxiety, inflammation, and nausea, and to have increased the use of cannabis since qualifying for a medical cannabis permit, and to subsequently have reduced or completely discontinued their prescription medications. In addition, women in our sample reported marginally lower levels of support from their primary care provider and significantly less support from specialist physicians than the men in our sample. And significantly more of them received certification for their state medical cannabis card from medical cannabis practices," end quote. These findings are consistent with those of numerous other studies finding that patients enrolled in medical cannabis access programs typically reduce or eliminate their use of prescription medicines, particularly opioids. This study, Gender Differences in Medical Cannabis Use, Symptoms Treated, Physician Support for Use, and Prescription Medicines Discontinuation, appears in this month's edition of the Journal of Women's Health. That's the end of our Hemp News segment tonight, but I do want to say that if you are a loved one, need to find a doctor anywhere across the United States that can help you get your medical cannabis permit, we have a physician referral service. Just call us at our office. Here in Portland, that number is 503-235-4606. Again, that's 503-235-4606. Now we have a couple of interviews I did last weekend while I was down in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, at the May and Hayes Experience. We have Enrique Ibarra, who was one of the lead organizers of the May and Hayes Experience, and Maureen Priestley, a medical professional who's helped medical patients across Mexico and Latin America. So thanks for tuning in. and help us restore hemp. Good night.
Hey, welcome. We are at the Mayan Haze Experience in Puerto Vallarta, and I'd like to introduce Maureen Priestley,
Yes.
also known as Mimi here locally, who tell us about your organization helping medical marijuana patients here.
Oh, great. Yes, we have a center here in Puerto Vallarta where we help children and adults that have a whole variety of different medical needs, ranging from autism, epilepsy, Parkinson's, stroke, traumatic brain injury. I am a neuropsychologist, so I'm very interested in helping people recuperate their cognitive and neurological functions. And we've always been very interested in trying to help people without the use of the very strong pharmaceuticals, because since we need to help people learn to speak and to talk and to learn again, many of those medications function to keep them pretty much out of the loop and sleepy. So for the past several years, we've been working very, very hard here locally, nationally, and of course internationally, trying to find very good sources of cannabidiol, and of course sometimes we are using some sources of THC with the patients, especially if they're in severe pain, or if we can't control everything with the CBD with the epilepsy. So what we do too with the we get just a minor profit from the sale of some of these items, and we put that right back into the center to pay for the therapies for the children and for many families here that have no recourse, no resources to buy their oil.
What is the name of your center?
The name of our center is called Pasos Adelante, which in English means taking steps forward. So our job is when somebody comes in, whatever we can do to kind of open up some doors for them and make their lives a little bit better. So whether it's going to be through therapy or help them solve some problems, we've been very active, of course, locally with food drives, etc. during this pandemic.
What is your website if our viewers wanted to find your organization?
Oh, it's called Pasos Adelante, PV, which stands for PuertoVallarta.com.
Would you spell that out just so our audience will know how
Sure.
to?
It's PASOSADELANTE.PV.com.
Okay, thank you.
And our webpage is in both languages.
Okay, that's always useful, especially our audience is mainly English.
Yeah.
We do get some international viewers that translate themselves. So you were here with the Mayan Haze Experience this weekend. You're kind of organizing the panels and some of the speakers.
Yeah, we've been very instrumental in helping the flow of all of the speakers and make sure that everybody's in their places and then to be able to introduce them. I fortunately had an opportunity to present some of my wonderful patients on the second day of the conference, and their experience, personal experience, with using some of the products and how it has tremendously benefited them. And testimonials are always very heartfelt, and we're also very linked into the scientific studies because that's also very, very important. Testimonials are very, they help, but we really have to demonstrate scientifically what's going on.
You had a doctor yesterday who presented. What was her name?
Oh, there were several yesterday.
Okay.
We had one, Dr. Mirna, who spoke a great deal about cancer protocols. And
She's the one I saw. Of course, I don't understand Spanish, so I didn't stay for all.
yeah, she's doing tremendous work here in the country, and her work involves not only the use of CBD, but a very wonderful protocol on detox, vitamin C, oxygen, and not even a fraction of what the chemo and the radiation therapy is costing. She also mentioned that in some cases people continue to opt to continue with the chemo and the radiation, which is fine. but then they get the added benefit of the detox and moving much quicker. And the cost in Mexico for this type of therapy is probably maybe an eighth, if that, of what it would cost in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the health system here is public financed by and large, right?
Yes, and you know,
So even though Americans think that our country is somehow, an advanced country, in Mexico they have public health care.
yes, in fact, all teachers, policemen, almost anybody that has a job will be connected to the Social Security hospitals, and their medical services will be taken care of.
So you had several patients that appeared as well.
Yes, yes. I gave the introduction, explained about why I am in this, because a lot of people have asked me, why would somebody like me that has had a whole lifetime of working and publishing books in other areas, why would I get involved? Why would I risk it? And I said, I'm not really risking it because I'm helping people with their health in respect to their individual choices. So I'm not doing anything that puts anyone in danger. To the contrary, I'm helping them. So I gave a conference about the use of especially cannabidiol or CBD and how it helps children and adults. And I wanted the people in this audience, because we're doing a lot in Mexico, to educate medical professionals and the population and scientists on what it is. So I thought it would be very interesting to have them listen to direct commentary from people that were also very reluctant about using it. And because in Mexico, generally speaking, which is interesting, there is a huge stigma about the use of marijuana or cannabis.
Yeah, socially it's disapproved.
Yeah.
Well, you have the whole thing that people worry about the cartels, and their violent market tactics.
Yeah, and what I can say personally is we've not had any issue at all. In a way, we kind of wish they would help us because it would be nice for them to do something beneficial. But they're not interested, doesn't seem to be interested at all in the medical use of. Plus, legally in Mexico, for patients to get the CBD, they still have to bring it in from the United States. There are products available here, but we have to educate people too about how to select them so that they are not getting ripped off and they're getting a good quality. So unfortunately, we're working very hard on the regulation. We're working really hard. The people that are working the hardest are the people that need it, which are the patients, trying to get the politicians and the law passed that we can actually sell it.
Yeah, can you tell our audience about, I know the Supreme Court of Mexico has ordered the federal legislature, and for Americans who don't know, Mexico is the United States of Mexico. I think there are 31 states. I think that's right.
Yeah.
And we're in Jalisco, which is one of those. And but the federal Supreme Court has told the federal legislature in Mexico City to legalize cannabis, right? You want to explain that?
To legalize it and to regulate it, because
based on human rights.
Yes, because they have deemed that it is not, it's against the Constitution for people not to have access to something that can improve their health, and they have a human right to be able to select, and especially in the use of the hemp or in some cases the cannabis products. They've been proven over and over and over that they do not have toxic effects, and the scientific evidence is overwhelming. And thanks again to all of these very, very hardworking, especially moms in this country, that have pushed and pushed and pushed, because as anyone that's listening has ever seen, either their own child or someone else's child have an epileptic seizure, there's nothing more tremendous, and what everyone would love to do is be able to stop the seizure, obviously, and stop the progression of the brain damage. So many of these families have children that are very, very involved And none of the traditional medicines have been effective. You know, the anticonvulsives, sometimes they've had the epileptic surgery, and that's not been effective. So many of these families have run the gamut of everything they could possibly do for their kids, and yet we see something that could really make a difference, and it's been blocked.
It's a global phenomenon as well. I mean, I've seen kids, as you know, I've helped patients all across the United States, hundreds of children that needed it for epileptic conditions. And I see it in Mexico, everywhere. It's a global phenomenon.
Well, and when I interviewed Dr. Dor from Israel, I was surprised that I asked him what their protocol was, and this was a couple of years ago, and he said to me, he was at that time the sub-director of health under Matulam in Israel, and he told me that the patients, in order to get access to the use of the different hemp and cannabis products, they had to go for at least 2 years of traditional medicine. And I said, well, you guys are the pioneers in the world in the use of medical marijuana. How would you do that? And he said, well, that's their country. And I thought, oh, that's just so disheartening, because you have something that could immediately, like with my patients with Parkinson or epilepsy, you see an immediate decrease in either their tremors or the seizures. And to not do that, to me, is very criminal.
You talked briefly about your prior career in books. Could you tell our audience about that?
Well, and that still continues. I travel all over. Well, one thing that I was very interested in, when I started my career as a psychologist in Arizona, and I was working a lot in the schools, and I found many, many children that were placed in special education because they were given English IQ tests. And if you don't speak English, of course you're not going to do well. Just like if someone gives me an IQ test today in Japanese, I'll come out mentally deficient. So I started coming to Mexico in the late 70s, early 80s, and then I decided I needed to learn Spanish, so I came down. And we started publishing a lot of books and instruments that evaluate children so that we could distinguish who really needed that special help and those kids that just needed to learn English as a second language. And then I got very interested in the level and quality of education throughout Latin America. So I work in, typically I've been in almost all the Latin American countries, and I work mostly with educators and psychologists, and we've published a lot of books on critical thinking, helping people move beyond that memorization level where they can actually apply information and think about it, because we do need, especially now, always, we need critical thinkers that don't just swallow information and not think about it and investigate.
A interdisciplinary course at Evergreen State College called Thinking Straight, with the author of a book that had us analyze various logical arguments. Very interesting class. I learned a lot, and I still apply it every day.
Well, good. And, I love to be able to go into the schools and see that when we're helping the teachers and the kids move out of that memorization and, kind of regurgitation mode where they can actually apply the information and think about it and create new applications and especially now, what I say to everyone, we're all in this situation where we have to adapt, we have to be cognitively flexible, we have to think about doing things very, very differently than we were doing in January, February of this year. And we've got to be able to go over these new speed bumps to move forward, and that's critical thinking. We have to look at what's available, look at the data, and figure out where else we can go. And that speaks a great deal to our campaign and our push to get things legalized and get access for people, because we just can't throw in the towel. We just got to keep working, because our patients matter. And if we have solutions, it's a crime not to be able to work with them. And sometimes, as you well know, sometimes you think we're like those salmon that are going upstream only to
Push back over the
get
falls.
electrocuted at the end.
have a bear each.
Yes, exactly. And so, but it's worth it. It's worth the effort. It's worth us doing everything we possibly can to make somebody's life just a little bit better than it was before they came across our path.
Thank you for coming on. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing about this event, or what's something for our American and global audience?
Well, we have, in fact, here in Puerto Vallarta, we have a very large community of Americans and Canadians, and they're much more educated about these products than some of our local people, because in Mexico, like I said, it's been a very stigma. People are used to using a lot of alcohol, but because they think if you smoke marijuana
It's like alcohol.
yeah, they think you're going to go straight to heroin, you know, and it's like some of the myths that we had, and I hope in the United States it's not so prevalent, but there's such a scare about any substance, even though alcohol they think is much better. But
you know, we lose and 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 then we win.
Yeah.
That's kind of how it works. And I know they just lost the election in New Zealand, but I think the next time they'll win.
Yeah.
And we lost a number of them in Oregon before we won. So that's
and
how
I'm very
social progress
impressed.
happens.
In fact, we've been able to transmit a lot of the conferences because I have a lot of people that are from Chile, from Uruguay, from Argentina, and they've seen it, and they love the fact that we're still in the fight. We've had a lot of obstacles to be able to pull this one off because of the pandemic, etc. But we're here, and people that are here, they've been some wonderful, wonderful presentations. And what I like too, a lot of them have been talking about the nutritional aspects of the plant and the proteins and the enzymes and everything and the omegas that we get directly from the plant that could certainly supplement a lot of people's nutrition.
It's amazing how many different things infant cannabis affect, you know, from nutrition and wellness to deforestation and world hunger. And, it's just amazing. Energy.
Yeah, and it will be fantastic once things get going for employment in Mexico.
Yeah, and the whole world.
Yes.
Well, thank you for coming on,
Thank
Maureen.
you.
We'll be posting this up on YouTube, and we stream it on our Facebook page. I'll email that to you.
Great. Thank you for coming. And
My
thank
pleasure.
you,
Thanks for having
Teresa.
All right. Hey, I'd like to introduce Enrique Ibarra. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, correct.
Okay, and you're one of the main organizers?
Yeah, our
Producer
company,
of the May and Hayes
Maya
Experience.
Hayes. Yes, correct.
Tell us about the May and Hayes Experience. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me here at this beautiful location. It's my first trip to Puerto Vallarta.
The beach is always right.
Yeah, it's the first time to go to a
Been
beach in
Mexico.
Mexico. I've been to Mexico City, Guadalajara several times. Thanks for inviting me here. This is really a nice resort. And it's been a 4-day event over Halloween and Dia de los
Dia de
Muertos.
Muertos. Today is Dia de Muertos here. That they have did that in Mexico.
Yeah, and
Today
so
we honor the people that is on the other side.
to our family and friends.
Yes.
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 So how did you come to start the May and Hayes experience?
Okay, Maya Case is an event that we think is missing here in Mexico. So people can start to get to know what's need to get into the cannabis industry, machinery, equipment. Also for other people to get to know what is cannabis, the benefits, and to do everything in a relaxed atmosphere, like the beach here in Mexico, the Pacific. So that's the main focus of Maya Hayes, to show all the visitors the current talent of Mexican cannabis entrepreneurs. Can be from growers, seed banks, nutrients, doctors, lawyers, scientifics. So people get to know what's already in the cannabis industry in Mexico.
So the website is it mayanhayes.com?
MayaHayes.com. They can go there, visit the website. We will upload the conferences we did here in the event. Due to the situation of the coronavirus.
Yeah, the pandemic has caused a lot more close down recently.
Yeah, but we have to still go with the show. The Hotel Fiesta Americana has opened its doors to the cannabis community, to the cannabis tourism, and they know how to the benefits of the cannabis, so they support us a lot with the events.
Yeah, I know.
Thank
Their
you.
kitchen worked with you. Is that right, or with the lady, or?
Yeah, we have a chef called Patricia. She's one of the best chef, of the representatives of the chef here in Mexico. And he comes every day to put a presentation of different foods, combining cannabis with Mexican cuisine.
I took some pictures of that, so we'll be interspersing some of those pictures while we're talking here.
Okay.
So there are a number of booths that are selling items as well, and so do you have plans for future events?
Yeah, next event will be held about April. We're still seeing the location. We're talking about Cozumel, maybe. The mayor of Cozumel has talked to us about his interest in opening the event there, and it will be about 2 or 3 times a year. This is the first one, and I think we're doing a really good job due to the pandemic situation. And I think the next ones, when the pandemic will be over, it will be a better show.
All right, yeah, the pandemic has been, I know you were planning on doing this last April, but
Yes.
you've been able to pull something
Yes,
out.
the original date was April 15 to April 24.
Yeah.
21, sorry, to April 21. So the 420 will be, it was going to be held there.
Yeah.
And we have several cups, international cups that we're going to be there, but due to the pandemic, they had to move the event. So we move it to this event, thinking that the pandemic was going to be over by this
Right.
time.
There's
But
another-
it's a second way. But
Well, we've all been wearing our masks and
Yeah.
doing social distancing.
Yeah,
There's
as you
a
can
lot
see
of
in the
hand
pictures.
washing.
Yes, yes.
Beaches
everything-
closed at 5.
Yes, yes. 2 o'clock in some places.
Yeah. But it's still been a great event. So what else should our audience back in America and around the world know about cannabis here in Mexico?
Okay. One of the main purposes is to get information to industrials and entrepreneurs here in Mexico, that what they need to be in the cannabis industry. We know that once the cannabis industry in Mexico starts to get some traction, it will become one of the top 5 suppliers of cannabis, either marijuana or hemp in the world. We already have.
I started with Mexican
Yeah.
marijuana, something I mentioned during
Yeah.
my presentation
Yeah.
back in the 70s.
Yeah,
I was much younger.
I haven't to hear it. And Mexico already, due to the current situation, there is not much financial backups for entrepreneurs of cannabis. The flowers of the products of Mexico have been tested for international judges, and they'll come to the same conclusion that these are really pregnant top shelf quality
Yeah.
from the cannabis. So we're sure that the Mexican investors and entrepreneurs are willing to start to operate in this industry. And I think with good communication and the trust in the investors, we have everything to start to get up the industry of cannabis in Mexico, the cannabis here in Mexico.
So I know the Supreme Court of Mexico has ordered the federal legislature to legalize marijuana. There have been several deadlines for, about a year and a half. There have been 4 or 5 deadlines, right?
Yes.
That the legislature is supposed to create these laws, but they haven't yet. But it's going to happen, right?
It's going to happen. The situation is that I have been in the cannabis industry for 18 years with a company in HS Mexico, and we understand that we cannot stop bringing the benefits to cannabis from Mexico. We cannot wait until politicians come together to a plan. So we're starting to move forward, and I think they can delay, I don't know, 1 or 2 times, but it's already a lot of industrials and entrepreneurs in cannabis. We're already working for the industry here in Mexico, because we know each day a lot of people either die or suffer a bad quality of life only because they don't have access to cannabis therapy.
Yeah.
So,
Or run into some law enforcement situation that
Yeah,
can
yes.
ruin their life too.
Yeah, exactly.
That's something that we've got to hit. I know you're trying to do that.
Yes, and with this event, we talked to the Puerto Vallarta government and show them that the benefits of having a cannabis tourism already open here in Vallarta. It's one of the main benefits for this tourism.
City. You've got these mountains surrounding the bay
and we told
tropical.
Yeah, we told them that the cannabis user is not the idea they have that is from 20, 30, 40 years ago, that is a person that is in the streets doing nothing for the society. That is completely the opposite. We have professionals, doctors, lawyers, scientific, teachers, medical person or entrepreneurs that are really productive and always looking to bring the benefits of cannabis and all around this atmosphere to the world.
Well, I appreciate we're both motivated by cannabis.
Yes.
That's something that we have in common with people all around the world.
Yes.
Part of that community.
Yes, because we're going on the move forward. I have the idea that we have to come together all the cannabis entrepreneurs around the world, because it's time that due to the globalization internet we can all organize and as a one voice so the politicians around the world start to pay attention and make things right about cannabis, because a lot of the problems with cannabis is just because it's illegal in some places.
You've got some fantastic art. The people who are doing your art are very eye-catching.
Yes.
Colorful, I think.
Thank you.
Great. So this is is this your company too?
HS Mexico is a company, it's a cannabis consulting company. We have partnered with several industry companies around the world. Scientific Solution is one of our partners for all construction equipment. They are located in San Diego. We have other, as you can see, some other brands around the expo. All those are all partners with HS Mexico, so we represent them here in Mexico and help them with all the markets here. So what we offer in HS Mexico is that if you want to get into cannabis industry, we can help you. We already 18 years in this, so we know everything that has to be known about Mexico's cannabis.
So what is the website for this company?
Scientific Solution is Scisol Inc. SCISOLINC.com.
If you want our audience to be able to contact you about campaigns or anything,
Okay, they can go to mayanhayes.com or to our company HS Mexico with hsmx.mx.
That's easy.
Yeah, it's easy. It's very easy.
Yeah, sure. All right. Well, thank you, Amaro. I appreciate
Thank you very
it.
much.
Thank you for inviting me.
And you're gonna be here in 2 more weeks, so something.
Will you be up in Guadalajara?
Yeah.
I'll see you there. It's pretty exciting.
Excellent.
So I appreciate you inviting me.
Thank you, and thank you all, and please, to all the international cannabis community, please take a look at Mexico, because we're going to do big things around the world.
Enrique Ibarra,
Ibarra.
man, his experience, and you're next. Thank you again.
Thank you.